It all began in the quiet rhythm of my Saturday morning. I had decided to dedicate the day to deep cleaning the house. Dust bunnies had been gathering in corners like little secret armies, and I was determined to chase every one of them away. The sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, scattering soft patterns on the wooden floors, and I could hear birds chirping in the yard. Everything felt peaceful, perfectly ordinary, until that knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighbor's husband, Tom, sometimes came over to borrow tools or deliver something for his wife, but we didn't speak much. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the door, curious and slightly hesitant. When I opened it, there he was, tall, a little winded from the brisk walk, with that familiar, warm smile that somehow made him seem both approachable and distant at once. I felt a flicker of something. Nervousness, maybe curiosity. "Hi, I hope I'm not bothering you," he said, his voice careful, almost hesitant. "I was wondering if I could talk to you for a minute." I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in, though my heart had picked up pace. There was a tension in the air, subtle but insistent, the kind that makes you aware of every movement, every word. He glanced around at my home, nodding appreciatively at the clean surfaces, the neatly arranged flowers in a vase by the window. "You've always had such a lovely home," he said, and for some reason, hearing it from him, with no audience, felt intimate, almost confessional. We moved to the living room, and I noticed how he seemed to relax once he was inside, as if stepping into my space had softened some weight he was carrying. The conversation started cautiously, small talk about the neighborhood, the weather, but then there was a pause. That pause was heavy with unsaid things, like a quiet drumbeat urging us to acknowledge a truth neither of us had dared speak aloud before. "Then," he said it, "I've always admired how you manage everything. Your home, your garden. You seem so grounded. I guess I wanted to tell you that." His words caught me off guard, not because they were flattering. They were, but because they carried something else. Sincerity, honesty, and a recognition of the quiet life I had built for myself. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a casual comment tossed in passing. It was thoughtful, and it touched something deep in me, something I hadn't realized I'd been longing to hear. We talked for hours that morning. Not in a rush, not with pretense, just two people sharing thoughts and reflections they'd kept private. He listened when I spoke about my small victories and small worries, and I listened as he admitted struggles and joys he rarely revealed. There was a rhythm to our conversation, a gentle ebb and flow that felt both new and familiar, like rediscovering a melody I'd forgotten. By the time he left, the sun had shifted in the sky, painting the living room in golden light. I closed the door behind him, feeling a strange mixture of warmth and curiosity, of connection and newfound awareness. Something had shifted, not just between us, but within me. I went back to my cleaning, but the air seemed different somehow, charged with a quiet possibility. It wasn't about romance, and it wasn't about drama. It was about recognition, about being seen and appreciated in a way that made my heart swell quietly. And as I scrubbed the kitchen floor again, I found myself smiling at the unexpected turn of a perfectly ordinary morning. The days after that morning seemed to hum with a quiet electricity. I couldn't help but notice the little ways I looked forward to seeing Tom, even if it was just in passing through the yard or at the mailbox. It wasn't about longing in the dramatic sense. It was about noticing him, truly noticing him, and realizing that he seemed to notice me in the same way. One afternoon, I was in the middle of sorting through old photographs in the living room. The sun was streaming through the window at just the right angle to make the dust motes dance like tiny golden stars. I was lost in a memory, holding a faded photo of my children when I heard the familiar knock. My heart did that little flip again. "Hey," he said, stepping inside with that same careful smile, like he was aware of the delicate boundary he was crossing, but also felt compelled to do so. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd bring over something. I hope it's not a bad time." He handed me a small potted plant, the green leaves vibrant against the terracotta pot. "For your windowsill," he said. "I saw it at the nursery and thought of you. Thought you might like it." I laughed softly, touched by the thoughtfulness. "That's very sweet of you." "Thank you." We settled into the living room, and I noticed how comfortable it had become to just exist in the same space without any pressure. We talked about trivial things at first, books we were reading, a funny story about his wife's new baking experiment, but gradually our conversation drifted into more personal territory. He spoke about moments in his life he rarely shared, moments of doubt and resilience, and I found myself opening up too, revealing little pieces of myself that I usually kept hidden. It was in those moments, the small silences and shared smiles, that I felt an unexpected depth forming. There was trust there, a quiet understanding that we could be completely honest without judgment. It was rare, especially at this stage of life, to find someone who could see you so clearly, without expectation. At one point, he leaned back and said, "I think we all need a space where we can just breathe, where we can be ourselves without the weight of everything else." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I felt as if we were the only two people in the world. I realized then that what I was feeling wasn't just connection. It was recognition. He wasn't just noticing me for appearances or surface-level charm. He was noticing the heart beneath it, the quiet resilience I had built over the years, the small victories and disappointments that shaped who I was. And I was noticing him in the same way. When he finally got up to leave, the afternoon had stretched lazily into evening, the golden sunlight giving way to the soft, pink glow of twilight. We lingered at the doorway, neither of us wanting to break the moment too abruptly. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for the plant and for stopping by." He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that seemed to carry more than words could express. "Thank you for letting me." As the door closed behind him, I felt a sense of warmth that stayed with me long after he was gone. It wasn't a dramatic love story. It wasn't filled with impulsive decisions or forbidden affairs. It was something subtler, more profound, a recognition of kindred spirits, a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity. I sat back on the couch, the plant now resting on the windowsill, and realized that sometimes the most unexpected experiences aren't about excitement or danger. They're about finding someone who sees you and letting yourself see them in return. That afternoon, the house didn't just feel clean. It felt alive, filled with possibility and the kind of quiet hope that makes ordinary days extraordinary. The days that followed were a mix of routine and anticipation. I found myself organizing my home with a little more care, noticing how the light fell through the windows and wondering if he might stop by. It wasn't obsession, at least not the kind that keeps you awake at night, but a gentle curiosity, a quiet pull I couldn't quite explain. One late morning, I was in the kitchen, stacking freshly washed dishes, when I heard the soft, familiar knock. My heart skipped, and I wiped my hands on my apron, moving toward the door with a mix of excitement and calm. "Hi," he said, looking slightly sheepish, but with a warmth that immediately put me at ease. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I thought maybe we could sit for a while." I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. There was something about the way he hesitated just inside the doorway, a vulnerability that made me want to reach out, not in words but in quiet understanding. We settled into the living room, the sunlight soft against the walls. He held a mug of coffee, and I poured myself some tea. The conversation started lightly as usual, but then a pause settled between us, comfortable yet loaded with unspoken thoughts. "I've been thinking about our talks," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't get many chances to talk like this. Not really. You make it easy, and it's refreshing. Unexpected, but in the best way." His words struck me, not for their charm, but for their honesty. Here was a man, married and responsible, yet willing to share a space of emotional openness without any pretense. I realized I was learning something about him and about myself. That willingness to be vulnerable, to speak without armor, was rare. I shared a memory from my youth, something I had tucked away for years, a disappointment that had shaped my caution, my carefulness. And he listened, really listened, nodding in all the right places, his eyes never leaving mine. There was no rush, no judgment, only a steady presence that made me feel safe. When I glanced at him, I noticed subtle details I hadn't before: the way his fingers drummed lightly against the mug, the faint crease between his eyebrows when he was absorbed in thought, the warmth in his smile when he returned my gaze. Each small observation made the room feel more intimate, more charged with something delicate yet undeniable. He leaned back and sighed, a long, quiet exhale that seemed to release a tension I hadn't realized I was holding as well. "I never expected this," he admitted softly. "Just talking, being seen. It's rare, you know?" I nodded, feeling the truth of his words echoing inside me. It was rare indeed. In the rhythm of daily life, with responsibilities and expectations, we seldom found a space where we could simply exist and be acknowledged without commentary, without judgment. When he left that afternoon, it was with a lingering glance, a gentle acknowledgement of the connection we shared. And as I closed the door behind him, I realized that something inside me had shifted. I felt lighter, more alive, more aware of the small, beautiful details that made life rich. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not for what I did or how I appeared, but for who I was. And in that recognition, I discovered a quiet courage, a willingness to embrace unexpected moments, and an openness to connection that I had almost forgotten. That evening, as the house settled into the soft hush of twilight, I lingered by the window, looking at the potted plant he had given me. Its leaves caught the last rays of sunlight, and I realized that life had a way of surprising you, subtly, beautifully, and profoundly, if you let it. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of our conversations settled into something steady, like the gentle cadence of a favorite song you hadn't realized you missed. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet, deliberate unfolding of a connection that felt rare and unexpectedly profound. One afternoon, I was in the garden, trimming the rose bushes and letting the scent of earth and blossoms fill the air. The sunlight was soft, golden, and I felt at peace, fully present in the moment. That's when I heard the familiar knock. He was standing there, holding a small notebook and a pen, looking slightly hesitant but smiling in that warm, knowing way. "I was wondering if I could share something with you," he said, stepping inside after a polite pause. We moved to the living room, where the light was just right, filtering through the curtains to cast gentle patterns on the floor. He opened the notebook and began to read, short reflections, simple observations about life, gratitude for the little things, thoughts he hadn't spoken aloud before. Each word was thoughtful, heartfelt, and beautifully honest. As I listened, I realized how much we had grown to understand each other. Our connection wasn't about drama or fleeting excitement. It was about respect, awareness, and the simple, profound pleasure of being seen and heard. The vulnerability in his words mirrored my own, and it made me appreciate the trust we had built, something delicate and rare, yet entirely real. We talked for hours, sharing stories, memories, and quiet laughter. There was a rhythm to our exchange, a flow that felt natural and comforting. I found myself leaning into the conversation, not just listening but feeling, reflecting, and discovering parts of myself I had almost forgotten. In his presence, ordinary moments became meaningful. A shared smile, a thoughtful gesture, a pause filled with unspoken understanding, it all carried weight and beauty. When the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow across the room, he closed the notebook and looked at me. "Thank you," he said softly, "for letting me share this, and for listening, for being you." I felt a lump in my throat, a quiet emotion I couldn't quite name. "Thank you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, "for trusting me, for sharing with me." He left that evening with the same gentle acknowledgement that had marked all our meetings, and as I closed the door behind him, I realized that life had given me an unexpected gift, a reminder that connection doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in moments of honesty and mutual respect, in spaces where hearts meet without expectation. That night, I sat by the window, looking at the garden bathed in moonlight. The house felt warm, alive with memory and possibility. I thought about the conversations, the laughter, the silences, and the quiet understanding we had shared. It wasn't about what could happen or what might be. It was about what was real here and now. And in that realization, I felt something profound: gratitude. Gratitude for the unexpected, for the depth of connection we had discovered, and for the reminder that life, even in its ordinary rhythms, could still surprise us in the most beautiful ways. I went to bed that night with a sense of calm, a feeling that I was seen, appreciated, and understood. And I knew that those moments, small, tender, and unassuming, would stay with me, shaping the way I experienced the world, the people around me, and even myself. Sometimes the most extraordinary experiences aren't loud or dramatic. They're quiet, they're subtle, they're real. And that day, I discovered the extraordinary in the most ordinary of moments.